Okay, this video is just about O-ring seatings. I spent 2 years myself having a lot of trouble, went through a lot of pain, not knowing enough about O-ring seatings. And O-rings, there's a lot to know about them. You really need to know about O-rings, you really do. If you go to a shop to buy some O-rings, the people there don't have time to tell you, and half the time they don't understand it themselves. So the first thing is, if you go find your O-ring supplier, preferably someone who sells O-rings only, and ask for a chart. There's a chart and it's got all the O-ring seatings on it. That's a really great thing. But that in itself still isn't enough. You need to know so much more. Also, you can find those charts online. The next thing here is groove depth. So the depth of your groove is, it's really critical. I like to have it set up so that my O-ring has a 25% squeeze. That's quite a lot, but that's something you need to look at, how much squeeze you're going to give the O-ring. So I like 25%. It depends how much, whether it's static, whether it's moving, a lot of things. If your product is just sitting still, it's not stationary, it's not moving, then 25% squeeze is fine. So for example here, if this O-ring here is 2 millimeters diameter, then you would make this groove 1.5 millimeters deep, and then you'd have 25% squeeze. On to the next part here, we got ovaling. This is something guys just don't know, that they don't understand it. And I didn't understand it either. An O-ring is made from rubber most of the time. It is not made from foam. It will not compress. Just like water or a liquid will not compress. So what will it do? It can only change shape. It cannot compress. Just remember that. So if it changes shape, you need to allow room for it to change shape. And this is one of the biggest faults I see when I go into places like Bunnings here in New Zealand, in Auckland, or in America you go to Home Depot and you look at products like things like garden hose fittings that you'll see a lot of them have done this squeeze, they haven't allowed room for the ovaling, and it causes a huge problem. I'll talk about that later. So here you can see I've allowed a good amount of room here, plenty of room for this O-ring to oval. And if we look on this side here, that's what it should look like. It's a little bit exaggerated, but once it's squeezed in there, it's ovaled. Now that is not compressed. You cannot compress rubber. That's why you see blocks of rubber under bridges, under highways, holding up highways. They have the rubber there because it doesn't compress. If you used any other material, it could, like foam, would compress and you'd have trouble. So there it goes. On to the next piece here. Metric. Try to go metric. It's just it'll make your life 1,000 times easier. I know you guys in the States don't like that, but honestly, metric, it's just 1,000,000 times easier. Really, Imperial is just junk. I'm not sorry to say it. It's just, Imperial is junk. Stick to metric. Okay, another problem here you'll see often is if you put an O-ring in here and if you don't allow room for it to oval, this is what's going to happen. It just chops the O-ring off. It won't compress. You think it's going to compress, but it will never compress because it's like a liquid. So it just chops it off. That's what happens if you don't leave enough room for it to oval. It will chop it off. Shore is another thing. You can get harder O-rings or softer the compound. The Shore is the compound, what the how hard that material is the O-ring's made from. So you can have 90 and 70 Shore. The higher Shore, it just gives you less chance of extruding the O-ring. I'll talk about that now. Another big thing is your tolerance. If you've got a part fitting here, say like this male part fitting the female part here, if you have too much gap here, all that happens, well, speaking about my product first, the reason I know so much about this, and I know a lot about it. I didn't know a lot about it before, and I suffered with it for 2 years. I sell a product that uses 10,000 psi pressure. That's why I learned so much about it. At 10,000 psi, an O-ring tries everything it can to escape. So when you make your tolerance, the closer your tolerance is, the tighter it is, the better. If you have a gap, for example, say 250 micron gap, it's enough for an O-ring just to squeeze out, just to pop out. You've got to keep this tolerance tight, as tight as possible, and it'll make life a lot easier. Friction. I've seen situations where you have a lot of friction on the O-ring, but you shouldn't have any friction on the O-ring if it's ovaled and out of the way. But because designers have not allowed it to oval enough room for it to oval, a bit of rubber is under pressure and it's rubbing as the part goes in and out. It's rubbing on the O-ring and wearing it out. An O-ring shouldn't wear out very quickly if it's lubricated and it's got room to move out of the way. You've got to give it room to get out of the way. It shouldn't be under any friction, major friction. It should only be under a little bit of elastic pressure from the material pushing outwards, not stuffed in there. So that is everything that I talked about today. Probably maybe missed something, but it's really, really important. You've got to know all this stuff. There's a lot to know about it, and I wish I had known all about this way back. So I hope you use this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. It'll make this useful. I think it will be definitely useful. Go and get your O-ring chart, and that tells you all the different squeezes. I use 25%. That's the highest, but sometimes you use 10%. It depends on the material and stuff like that.